Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on the last messenger of Allah. Okay, we have completed in the previous lecture our section on tafsir, and we're now going into the material which constitutes the foundation or foundational information about the science of hadith. Now, hadith in Arabic, as a noun, it means conversation or saying. As an adjective in Arabic, it means something new. When it's used in this context, the science of hadith, or the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what it refers to are the sayings, the actions and approvals and information about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mannerisms, physical descriptions, all of that, which was conveyed by his companions to subsequent generations, and which became recorded in books which we know as books of hadith. With regards to the sunnah, because there's another term which is used and we need to understand what is the distinction between the two. The sunnah refers to the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his way, and it includes all of the things which I described previously, which are included in hadith: his sayings, actions, approvals, descriptions of his demeanor, his physical descriptions. All of that is included in sunnah, his way. So then, what is the distinction? What's the difference between the sunnah and hadith? And I should also mention that we'll look at in fiqh another meaning of sunnah, which means recommended things. That's how it's commonly used, as recommended things. But I'm just using it in the sense that it is related to the science of hadith here now. What is the distinction between the sunnah and hadith? Well, hadith represents the vehicle or the container is within which the sunnah was communicated. This is the difference between the two. When you talk about sunnah, you're not talking about the companions narrating and their students narrating and recording in books and things like that. You're not talking about that methodology, the system. What you're just talking about is the content. So, the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was conveyed in the structure or the container which we refer to as hadith. Now, the sunnah, when we speak about the sunnah, I should just mention briefly that the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam can be divided into two basic types. One which we call sunnah tabi'iyya, or natural sunnah, and the other which we call sunnah tashri'iyya, or legal sunnah. There's an important distinction, and I spoke about it briefly before. The natural sunnah are things which the Prophet ﷺ did as an Arab, a human being, an Arab, in the 7th century, which had no legal import. They were just his personal likes and dislikes and characteristics. How long he kept his hair, how he used to walk, the type of garments he used to wear, these kind of things. How he used to sleep, and all these things, we look at this as being a part of what is called the natural sunnah. And we talked about his slippers before, right? The sandals that he used to wear. He liked a particular style of sandal. And we are not obliged to go and wear sandals like he wore. Now, there was among his companions one, Abdullah ibn Umar, who used to do everything that the Prophet ﷺ did. He wore a ring on his left hand. Ibn Umar put one on his left hand. He used to walk this particular way. Ibn Umar used to walk the same way. He used to wear his garment in this way. Ibn Umar used to wear the garment in the same way. Whenever he changed, Ibn Umar changed. He imitated everything that the Prophet ﷺ did. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't stop him. He didn't say, don't do this. However, Abu Bakr didn't do it. Omar didn't do it. Uthman didn't do it. Ali didn't do it. And these are the Khulafa Rashidin. The 10 people who were promised paradise, none of them did it. So hey, we know that this was just an individual thing which Ibn Umar liked to do. And if you choose to do it, no harm. But it's not required, nor is it called for. Right? And to promote it as the deen is wrong. To promote it as the religion is wrong. Now, in the case of sandals, there is a legal sunnah regarding it. The type of sandals you wear is up to you. There is nothing legally involved in this style or whatever, except we can say that for men to wear women's sandals is haram. For women to wear men's sandals is haram. A woman came into the house of Aisha wearing her husband's sandals. And Aisha stopped her and said, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ cursed mannish women. So, there is a legal part. Prophet ﷺ said that Allah's curse is on the man who dresses like a woman and the woman who dresses like a man. So there is a legal aspect in sandals. Don't wear sandals which are typically women's sandals. Furthermore, Prophet ﷺ said that when you put on your sandals, you should put on your right foot first. And when you take off your sandals, you should take off your left foot first. And if the strap on your sandal breaks, either take off both sandals or fix it, but do not walk with one sandal on and one sandal off. These are the instructions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. In this regard, that has a legal aspect. He gave instructions. Do this, don't do this, do that. But his choice, as I said initially, in terms of what sandal we wear, that's up to you. Now, some people feel and question, why should it matter which sandal will you put on first? What is this picayune kind of, is Islam that picky that it matters you put on your right sandal first? What if you jumped into your sandals with both feet same time? A question, why is this right, left? The point is, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ instructed us to do this, to develop in us a sense of awareness of our actions, that we are conscious of what we are doing. Purpose is put into each and every action. to separate us from the animals. Animals who just do things out of instinct, do things without thought and reflection. So he said, put on your right foot first and take off your left foot first. Also, in putting on your right foot first and taking off your left foot first, we are favoring the right over the left. And in doing so, there is a subtle reminder for us on the day of judgment. We receive our book of good deeds, if we're going to paradise, where? In the right hand. And we receive our book of evil deeds, if we're going to hell, where? In the left hand, behind our backs. Okay, so in favoring the right over the left, there is a subtle reminder for us to choose the right thing so that we will receive our book of deeds in the right hand. It reminds us of Yawm al-Qiyamah. So there is reason behind this. I mean, besides the fact that in doing so, it also trains us in obedience to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's instructions. Now this is a small thing, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do not scorn any good deed. No matter how small it may seem to you, do not scorn it. What's the big deal? No. Because you are not able to do the big deeds consistently unless you establish the small deeds consistently. If you can't do those small deeds, then for sure you're not going to be able to do the big ones. Or you might do the big ones in a rush one day or 2 days, but you can't keep it going. But when you establish that foundation, that conscious foundation of doing what the Prophet ﷺ showed us to do. So, for example, something which didn't exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, wearing your watch. It has been pointed out that the sunnah of the kuffar is to wear their watch on their left hand. That is the sunnah of the kuffar. The Prophet ﷺ, he favored the right over the left. This is how he's described. Whenever he's doing something which is there's honor in it, he used to put it on the right. He wore his ring on the right. He put on his shoes right foot first. He put on his clothes right side first. The right. So in wearing the watch on the right hand, we distinguish ourselves from the kuffar on one hand. Right? This is important. And we follow the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ on the other hand by favoring the right. So, I mean, we approach. I mean, this is some things, people, you never stop to think about this, right? But this is how we should approach all of the things that we do. What was the sunnah? What was the preference of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in these things? And the instructions in that direction. So, we take from that and we apply it. Make it practical in our lives. There's so many statements of the Prophet ﷺ. Grow your beards. Trim your mustaches. Distinguish yourself from the kuffar. This is... So many times you hear the Prophet ﷺ stressing this thing of distinction from the kuffar. So the Muslim identity is clear. What hangs below the ankle is in the hellfire. Pants hanging below the ankle. The way of the kuffar is baggy pants all over your foot. This is their way. And unfortunately, that's what Muslims do today. To wear your pants above the ankle is, people are sheepish about that. Hey, you know, this is flood pants. Couldn't afford a new pair of pants. And part of this is all, you know, part of the training that we need to go through. We should never be shy to establish the sunnah. If we feel shyness, sheepish about practicing the sunnah, and we feel comfortable, proud about following the sunnah of the kuffar, we have a problem. We have a problem. This is saying something about our faith. Yeah. Anyway, as we said, the sunnah is divided into two parts: the natural sunnah and the legal sunnah. And the religion is built from the legal sunnah. Now, when we look at a hadith, the hadith has two aspects to it. There's an example of the hadith given in the book. حدثنا مسدد قال حدثنا يحيى عن شعبة عن قتادة عن أنس عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخي ما يحب لنفسه. رواه البخاري. Musaddad told us that Yahya informed him from Shu'bah, from Qatada, from Anas, from the Prophet ﷺ, that he said, none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Collected by Al-Bukhari. This is the standard format of a hadith. Now the first part of the hadith, where we hear this chain of names, Musaddad told us from Yahya, who informed us from Shu'bah, so and so. This is the chain of narrators, known as the Sanad. And the text which is conveyed, none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. That is called the Matan, or the text. And the hadiths are traditionally divided into two sections: the Matan and the Sanad. And the Sanad was the a natural development from teaching the Sunnah. As the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ taught the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to each other and to those who came after Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they would always mention the incident and whom they heard that incident from, if they didn't see it or hear it themselves. So if they saw it themselves, for example in the case here of Anas, in teaching his students from the next generation, would have said, I heard Allah's messenger say, none of you believes until so and so. Now Qatada, who was his student from what is known as the Tabi'un, the next generation after the Sahaba, Qatada, when he was teaching his students or other scholars of his generation, he would have said, I heard from Anas, who said that he heard from Rasulullah ﷺ that he said so and so, so and so, so and so. So as the information was being conveyed, those whom that information was conveyed from were mentioned. Right? So this is basically how the chain of narration evolved. And this came about because Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was particularly dear to his companions. They honored, revered, loved him, and were very keen to learn whatever he said and to apply it in their lives and to convey it to others. So whenever he told them, none of you has truly believed until I become more dear to him than his son, his father, and all of humankind. When he told them that, they took that statement to heart. They worked on their own faith until the Prophet ﷺ became more beloved to them than their own family. Now, what this meant practically is that they were prepared to do anything he instructed them to do. They were prepared to do anything he instructed them to do. And if their parents or their family asked them to do something which went against what the Prophet ﷺ told them to do, they would refuse. That was the practical manifestation of their love of the Messenger of Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ, he told them on one occasion saying, Allah blesses any man who hears a saying of mine, memorizes it and understands it, then conveys it just as he heard it. For perhaps the one who is informed has more understanding than the one who heard it. So he stressed to them the importance of conveying whatever they learned from him. And he used to say, بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. Convey whatever you have learned from me, even if it is only a single verse of the Quran. So there was great stress placed on conveying the information. But at the same time, he warned them, saying, مَنْ كَذَّبَ عَلَيَّ مُتَعَمِّدًا فَلْيَتَبَوَّعْ مِقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ. Whoever lies about me deliberately will find his seat in the hellfire. And this hadith was narrated by the vast majority of his companions. Many companions narrated this. So there was a severe warning. And this is why when you actually look at the numbers of companions who were involved in conveying his sunnah, from the more than 20,000 that were with him on Hajj, right? The 40-odd, 50,000 of them that had made contact with him, those who conveyed hadiths from him were in the neighborhood of 500 plus. 500 plus. Of that 500, 300 of them only narrated one hadith from him. They were careful. They didn't want to convey anything which they had any doubt about. They were careful. To remember one thing, you can do that. Anybody can do that. And they had very good memories. So, the numbers who were actually engaged in conveying the information were few from among the many companions. Now, there is a common misconception that is held, which leads people to doubt the authenticity of the hadiths, because of the fact that historically we know that it was in the reign of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the fifth of the righteous caliphs is often referred to, which is like his reign was between 717 and 719, remembering that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ died in 632. Okay? So it's nearly 100 years after the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Less than that, but 80 something years. He instructed the scholars of his time like Abu Bakr ibn Hazm, Sa'ad ibn Ibrahim, Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, to collect up the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, to compile them into particular books, and to weed out the narrations which were not authentic. They were given that instruction. So people say that it was almost 100 years after the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that the hadiths were written down. Actually, this is not correct. In fact, hadiths were written down in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. The majority of the companions who conveyed hadiths did so not only verbally but in writing. And their students, the majority of them recorded the hadiths in writing also. So the writing was going on at the same time as the oral narration. So the sunnah was being transmitted in both the verbal form as well as the written form. When we do future levels of this course, when we go into usul al-hadith in detail, this information inshallah will be conveyed in depth. The research that is involved in there to understand that in fact the sunnah for the most part was recorded from the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and in all of the subsequent generations. So it wasn't that it was being conveyed verbally, orally for nearly 100 years and then all of a sudden they wrote it down, because this is where people who want to raise doubts about the sunnah usually come from. But this is an inaccurate understanding, because the historical record proves otherwise. Anyway, the point is that the hadiths were analyzed and divided into two basic categories. One category which was referred to as sahih, authentic, and another category which was referred to as da'if or inauthentic. These were the main two categories of hadith. And there were conditions which were set, which had to be met for hadith to be classified as sahih, and when they were not met, they became classified as da'if. And the information which was gathered, which enabled them to make these analyses, was information which was handed down by those who were also handing down the hadiths. That they used to make records of those who attended the circles of hadith. Those who taught each other and the strength of their memories, how effective they were, those who used to write down, those who made mistakes in their narrations, they passed on this information at the same time. This information was compiled, and it ended up also in books, which came to be known as the books of biography, the biographical books, or kutub al-rijal. And from comparing the information of these books, the narrators were categorized as to whether they were reliable or whether they made mistakes on occasion, whether they were liars, and all these kind of things. They analyzed them. And there are three main conditions which need to be met for a hadith to be considered sahih. Now, the actual number of conditions is more than three. I just chose for this introduction to the science three, the main three. And the first condition is referred to as adl. That the or adala, that the narrator be truthful, a known practicing Muslim, righteous, honest, God-fearing, pious. This had to be the character of the individual. If it wasn't, they did not narrate from them. Now, if we use that criterion for the information which is conveyed to us in the newspapers and other sources, television, etc., hey, we just have to shut down all the televisions and tear up all the newspapers. We couldn't trust these people. These people in their personal lives are corrupt. They lie without any qualms. You know, if it will make them famous, they'll lie in a minute, right? You know, so that criterion, it just shows you the stringent kind of requirements that they had. That the people had to be known to be righteous, practicing Muslims. And Imam Bukhari, there is an incident from his life which demonstrates how picky he was, where on one occasion he went to gather a hadith, to collect a hadith from somebody some distance away. He had rode for a number, for some days or whatever. He came to the man's house, and the man was outside the house trying to catch his donkey. The donkey had run away, so he was trying to catch it. So what he did was he picked up his stove and he held it like this and was sort of shaking it, implying to the donkey that there's some food in there, so the donkey would come. When the donkey brought his head, he caught him, right? Took him back and tied him up. Imam Bukhari observed this. He had gotten off his horse, he observed it, he got back on his horse and left. He didn't collect the hadith from him, because he felt if he would trick the donkey like this, because it was a trick, what he did was he tricked him. He faked that there was food there. There's no food there. Okay? He would prefer not to narrate any hadith from this man. This was Bukhari, very picky. And this is why Sahih al-Bukhari, this compilation of hadith, is classified, considered amongst Muslims to be the most authentic book after the Quran. That's how they refer to it. Asahul kitabi ba'da kitabillah, Sahih al-Bukhari. Well known. Anyway, the first condition we said is that the narrator had to be righteous. The second condition is that he had to have this quality of what is called dabt in Arabic, dabt, which meant accuracy in his narration. Either he narrated accurately from his memory, or he narrated from written texts. So it's either accuracy of narration from memory or accuracy of narration from written text. They call it dabt al-sadr and dabt al-kitaba. Now, how would they know who was accurate in their memory and who wasn't? What would happen is that when a scholar of hadith was teaching, he had a group like yourselves. He would narrate a hadith. He would be teaching a subject and he would narrate the hadiths on that subject, explaining. Prophet ﷺ said this. After saying, I heard from so-and-so, who heard from so-and-so, who heard from the Prophet ﷺ, who said he said this, that he did this, he approved this, or whatever. Then he would go on teaching through wudu, through tahara, salah, and he would work his way through the various areas of Islamic knowledge. And his students would stay with him. Some would stay, some would go, some would join, some would stay for a while, some would, The main body would stay with him, and they would study under him for years. Not a 3-day course, For years they would sit with him. So it means what happened? The information he was conveying, do you think with those who stayed with him for 10 years, for example, during the period of that 10 years, do you think all he conveyed to them was new information? Maybe after a year was over, he ran out of everything he had. He'd given them everything. So what did he do? He started saying it again. So he would repeat that same information every year for 10 years. Now his students are sitting under him. And of course they would go and sit under other scholars too. But they would be with him. Some of them became like his helpers. They would help teach others who came late and these other kind of things. Some of them used to record. That was their responsibility to help their teacher. They would record all those people who joined the class. How long did they study with him and all this kind of information. They were recording all this stuff. And at the same time, they're listening to him narrate. If he's narrating from his memory, they would write down what he narrated the first time. Then, when he starts to narrate it the second time, they would put a circle at the end of the hadith. And when they heard him narrate it, they would put a little tick in there. And then the second year they heard it, they'd put another circle, and they'd put a tick. Each time they heard it, they'd put a circle, put a tick at the end of the hadith. Now, each time he narrates it, they're observing what is in writing and what he's saying. So now if they find the second year that he narrates it, he's narrating it different than the way he narrated it the first time. And the third year he narrated it another way. Right? We have a problem here. This indicated to them that that narrator's memory was not good. If the first year he narrated it one way, second year he narrated it the same way, third year the same way, this is one whose narration, his memory was good. Right? What they would do, if for example, they heard him narrate it one way the first year, and he narrated it another way the second year, they would go and sit under other students who were from their teacher's level, who narrated it from one from a higher level, and they would see. Because perhaps the double narration was not a mistake of his, but that in fact his teacher narrated it in two ways. So when they check with the other student who was on the same level of their teacher, and they find from him that he also narrates it two ways, then they know it is not their teacher. But now the question that needs to be dealt with is, was that a mistake from their teacher's teacher? Or was it in fact how it was narrated in two ways? Now, I'm not saying for you to decide or whatever. I'm just saying that this is the approach that they took, this analytical approach, looking at the material that was being narrated, how it was narrated, etc. And they would use that to determine whether the information which is narrated orally was from people of good memory. They would make notes. My teacher was, Sometimes what they used to do, instead of the teacher narrating, the students would narrate and the teacher would say at the end of the narration, okay. So sometimes what the students would do to check their teachers is they would read back the narration in a different way from how they heard it from the teacher, maybe changing a word or two. And if he said okay, then they knew his memory was not so good. These are among the signs. And this was a test that they did of Imam Bukhari. It's well known in the history of Imam Bukhari that when he came to one of the cities there in Iraq, And the scholars of hadith, he had his fame of being, one of the masters of hadith had spread before him. They welcomed him to the city. And prior to his coming, a group of these scholars of hadith there in the city, they chose 100 hadiths, right? And these hadiths are each one with a chain. And what they did was they switched the chains around amongst themselves. Each one memorized it with the chain of another hadith, right? So when Imam Bukhari came and he sat down, they said, we'd like to get your comment on these particular hadiths. So they narrated to him these 100 hadiths with these reversed chains which have been switched. Imam Bukhari listened to them. When they had finished, he said, this hadith, its chain is so and so, not the chain that you mentioned, and he quoted their chain. Then he went to the next one. He worked his way right through the 100, quoting back to them the wrong chain they mentioned and correcting and putting the right chain in place. The people bore witness that Imam Bukhari was a master. He was the man, as they say, right, in our day, right? He was the man. That was Imam Bukhari. The amount of hadith he memorized was incredible. Allah gave him basically what we call today a photographic memory. He would hear the hadith and it was just there. Anyway, as I said, the people who are narrating hadith, they tested in this way and a variety of different ways those who are narrating, checking their skills, etc. And they made note of all this information. The third major condition is that the one who is narrating a hadith had to have met the one from whom he was narrating. If he narrated hadith from somebody he didn't meet, then that meant that that chain of narration was broken. It was not complete. So this condition really is called continuity of the chain, or ittisal as-sanad. The chain of narration should be continuous, no break in it. How would they know if there's a break? Well, as I told you, people were recording who sat in the circles. So if so-and-so mentioned he heard a hadith, they would go back and check those students who had recorded material of who sat in the circle of this sheikh, and if his name was not on the roster, then they know he didn't meet him. There's a break. Right? Or they recorded information about when they were born and when they died, where they lived. So if, for example, the scholar that he was supposed to be narrating from, he died when that narrator was only 2 years old, hey, he couldn't have heard it from him. He couldn't have heard it from him. Right? And they had a condition that children used to come and listen. So there were children who did hear hadiths and did narrate them. Ibn Shihab was among them. He learned from the time he was like 7 years old. They set an age. They said, when a child is able to distinguish between a donkey and a horse, then he can narrate. Right? It means his mind has matured to the point, because for a kid there's a point where the kid, everything is a horse. Right? Everything is a horse. When he reaches the point where he knows what a donkey is, he knows what a horse is. He has now reached a level of comprehension to say, okay, from that point his narrations will be, and this is around the age of 7. This is also the age Prophet ﷺ had said, a man and woman divorce. When the child is around the age of 7, they have the right to choose which parent they want to go with at the time of divorce, because this is where they have that ability to distinguish. And that's why Prophet ﷺ also said, teach your children salah when they're 7. You see? At 7, and actually, even Western educationalists, they do talk about the age of 7 and the age of 10, as the Prophet ﷺ spoke about 1,400 years ago. Anyway, the point is that by comparing this information about the narrators, when they were born, when they died, where they lived, etc., they were able to identify where there were breaks in the chain and where chains were continuous. So when a person finds a hadith which fulfills these criteria, then that hadith is classified as sahih or authentic. And what this means then practically is that we have a piece of information coming from Rasulullah ﷺ which we must accept. We must accept it, because Allah said, "Ma ataakumur rasul fakhudhu." Whatever the messenger has given you, take it. "Wa ma nahakum anhu fantahu." And whatever he has prohibited you, leave it. So you must. If it comes to you, you must take it. This is a requirement. Allah said in the Quran, "May yuti' ar-rasul faqad ata'a Allah." Whoever obeys the messenger has obeyed Allah. So when that information comes in an authentic chain of narration, it is an obligation on us to follow it. And this is what the deen is built on. This is what determines whether we do something or whether we don't do it. If it comes to us in an authentic chain of narration, it becomes a pillar of the religion. If the chain is not authentic, then we cannot build law. We cannot build practice on information which is not authentic. So this analysis of hadith is very, very important in establishing the correct Islamic practices. Because it should be noted that the great Imams, Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Al-Shafi'i, Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, these Imams established their rulings, etc., before the major compilations of hadith. So it means that they did so without having access to this critical analyses which were done after their time. Now there was some analysis being done in their time. I will not say there was not any, and they themselves tried to do what they could, but they were not as specialized as those who came after. As a result, you will find in the different schools practices which are either based on weak hadiths, or they are rulings made without hadith, because no hadith was available. So the scholar would have extracted some principle from the Quran and applied it, when there are in fact hadiths which contradict the conclusion that they have come to. Or the chain of narration may have come to them in a weak channel, but there is also an authentic channel which they were not aware of. So this is the reality. This is why when you go from one school to another, you will find things in them which are not correct. In the Shafi'i school, for example, every Salatul Fajr they make qunut. Now this practice is based on a hadith, but the hadith is weak. Is the point. In the Hanafi school, it is typical for men to place their hands are placed on the chest. In the Hanafi school, they say women do this. That's for the women's salah. But the men, they place it below the navel. This is not correct. In the Maliki school, they typically pray with their hands hanging by their sides. but you cannot find any hadith to support it. In the Hanbali school, you can find different rulings like the others, which are based actually on weak hadiths. Every last one of the schools has said you will find some practices like that. For example, in the Hanbali school, you find the narration that when you go down into sujood, you place your knees before your hands. This is in the Hanbali school. Also found in the Hanafi. But this is based on a weak hadith. The authentic hadith is, as the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا سَجَدَ أَحَدُكُمْ, if any one of you makes sujood, فَلَا يَبْرُكْ كَمَا يَبْرُكُ الْبَعِيرُ, do not prostrate as the camel prostrates. فَلْيَدَعْ يَدَيْهِ قَبْلَ رُكْبَتَيْهِ, let him put his hands before his knees. That is the correct position. That is the authentic hadith. So I'm just saying that to say that the reason why we find certain differences, and this is not the only reason why there are differences in the schools, and we'll look at some of the other differences later, but at least from a hadith point of view, it is possible to correct up some of the differences by identifying the authentic hadiths and leaving these aside. And in fact, all of the great scholars of these hadith, these schools of Islamic law, they all used to say, Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i and the others all used to say, إِذَا صَحَّ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ مَذْهَبِي, if you find the authentic hadith, then that is really my madhab. That was their opinion. They were not about, I'm going to hold on to this thing, do or die, I don't care. No. Because they were of the opinion, unanimously, that if a hadith, an authentic hadith comes to somebody, for somebody to not follow that hadith and go according to the opinion of somebody else, they said this is not permissible in the religion. Not permissible. And there was a classical case of Abdullah ibn Umar, who when he was teaching, he taught people about making Hajj Tamattu'. That's the Hajj in which you combine Umrah along with the Hajj. And whilst he was teaching that, some of the students said, but your father and Abu Bakr said that we shouldn't do Hajj Tamattu', that we should do Hajj Qiran or Hajj Ifrad, that we shouldn't do Hajj Tamattu'. Ibn Omar got mad and he said, I tell you what Rasulullah ﷺ said, and you're telling me what my father and Abu Bakr said? They said, the religion is about to fall on you. And this is what they stressed. What Allah, what Messenger said, this has to be giving precedence over everything else. Opinions can be right or they can be wrong, for a variety of different reasons. The foundation is the authentic narrations. Now, when we look at the books of hadith, there are 6 which are most commonly spoken about. The famous 6, or the sound 6, they are Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abi Dawood, Sunan At-Tirmidhi, Sunan Ibn Majah, and Sunan what was the fourth one? An-Nasai, Sunan An-Nasai. Okay, these are the famous 6. Now, actually the number of hadith books are considerably more than the 6, but these are most commonly known by people. Now, the hadiths found in Bukhari and Muslim, these are virtually 100% reliable. That's why they're called Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim. But the hadiths found in the Sunan, they vary. Not all of them are authentic. Tirmidhi, Sunan al-Tirmidhi is the most authentic, or has the highest percentage of authentic hadith of the four, Sunan al-Tirmidhi and Sunan Abi Dawood. Then Sunan al-Nasai, then Sunan Ibn Majah. In fact, some scholars prefer to put Sunan al-Darimi in place of Sunan Ibn Majah. So those hadiths which are found in the other four Sunan and other books similar, they have to be classified before you can use them with surety. The scholar Sheikh Nasiruddin al-Albani rahimahullah, he did a massive work and analyzing these sunan, these four sunan, going through hadith by hadith and identifying the authentic and the inauthentic. So he has a version of the sunan which are called Sahih Sunan Abi Dawood, for example. The authentic narrations of Sunan Abi Dawood and Da'if Sunan Abi Dawood. And he separated them into two books. And the weak narrations of Abi Dawood. And he did the same for Ibn Majah, so on and so on. So. There is a statement made in the book here, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. Fourth from the bottom on page 79. Please correct it. There's a mistype. It states there, in the fourth line from the bottom, not the footnotes, fourth line from the bottom, page 79. Page 79. Fourth line from the bottom. It starts, nearly all inaccurate. Cross out in. It should be nearly all accurate narrations. Which can, it says cannot, cross out the not. Which can be used as evidence. Therefore, that sentence should read, if you go to the beginning of the sentence, that is, one may freely quote hadiths from both Sahih al-Bukhari and Muslim as evidence because they are very nearly all accurate narrations which can be used as evidence. The earliest book of hadiths to reach us is the compilation of Imam Malik, known as Al-Muwatta. This has been translated into English. Al-Muwatta. Now Imam Malik, the Imam of Medina, his grandfather was a Sahabi. His grandfather was a Sahabi. His compilation, as I said, Al-Muwatta, this is the oldest compilation from the period of the Tabi'in to reach us. And the largest compilation of hadiths is that of Imam Ahmed, known as the Musnad of Imam Ahmed, or Musnad Ahmed. That has over 40,000 hadiths. Imam Ahmed collected them all, as many as he could. Not focusing on whether Sahih, Da'if, all this kind. He just focused on trying to collect them all. Imam Malik, he did try to ensure that the hadiths that he collected were authentic. So the number of weak hadiths in Muwatta are few. But his compilation, when you read it, you will see that it contains many statements of the Sahaba. For example, it's not just a hadith collection. It was his teaching notes, you could say. It contains information he got from through the Sahaba as well as hadiths. And in that Muwatta, you will see him say there that the position of the hands in Salah is right hand over left hand. Though most of Malikis, they pray with their hands by their side. You will hear the term, as I said, hadith sahih, hadith da'if. You can't use the da'if hadith. You will also hear this term hadith mawdu' or fabricated hadith. A fabricated hadith is one which either it has no chain of narration at all, like the hadith, seek knowledge even unto China. Utlubul ilm walau fis sin. This is fabricated. It has no chain of narration at all. Or the hadith, my companions are like stars, any one of them you follow you'll be rightly guided. Ashabi kan nujum, bi'ayhim iqtadaytum ihtadaytum. This is not authentic at all. Or it may be classified as fabricated because one of the narrators in the chain was a known liar. He was known to lie. He was caught. People caught him lying. And there's a well-known case of Ibn al-Mubarak, one of the hadith scholars, where on one occasion he went into the masjid in Damascus, and there were people there, storytellers, you know, who used to like to narrate stories. People would gather around them and they would narrate stories. And what they did was they would add chains of narrations to their stories, because the idea of chains of narration was popular, right? So he began to tell this story, right? And he began by saying, Ibn al-Mubarak narrated to me from so and so, so and so and so. So Ibn al-Mubarak came, sat down, listening. Right? So when he finished saying that and he started to tell his story, Ibn al-Mubarak lifted his hand up and started to pluck hairs from under his armpit. The guy stopped his narration and said, "What are you doing? I am narrating a hadith from Rasulullah and here you are plucking hairs from your armpit." Ibn al-Mubarak said to him, "What I am doing is from the Sunnah." Prophet Muhammad said, "You should pluck the hairs from your armpit. What you are doing is lying, because I never narrated any hadith to you." You know? So, I mean, such a person, for example, on that kind of occasion, his name, people would make a note of it. This guy was a known liar. So any hadith he narrated, even if other people narrated it authentic, but he said it, liar. That hadith from him would be considered fabricated, not accepted. Once that label went on you, finish. No matter what you narrated, nobody would accept from you again. The use of hadith da'if. Some people have suggested that it is possible to use hadith da'if in areas of what they call fada'il al-a'mal. That is, fada'il al-a'mal, how do they translate that now? Virtuous deeds, yeah, thank you. Virtuous deeds, meaning not introducing something which isn't already there, but a hadith which talks about reward for a particular thing which is already there. So like, for example, the hadith about Salatul Hajjah, right? This hadith is da'if. It's found in Fazail al-Amal, which gives you a dua to make. You make 2 rak'ah and you make this dua. They call it Salatul Hajjah. It's in Fazail al-Amal. This hadith is da'if. It introduces something which has no foundation. So you cannot say, I can do this because it's from Fazail al-Amal. No, it's not. Because it is introducing something which has no foundation. Right? So that is not acceptable. Whereas a hadith which, though it may be weak, it is talking about something which the Prophet ﷺ already said to do. But it just says, if you do it, you get such and such a reward. So if you did it and there was no such reward, the foundation of what you are doing was already established in the Sunnah. So, no harm. This is what some scholars said. Although the majority of hadith scholars, they rejected this. They said, no, hadith is da'if, don't use it. And it should be noted that those scholars who said, yes, we can use it in these particular circumstances, they only allowed its usage if the reason for the weakness of the hadith was because the memory of the narrator was weak. Not because he was labeled a liar, no. If it was he's labeled a liar, they will not use it at all. So it is only where it was due to some weakness in that narrator's memory, which means that the likelihood was still there that it could have been authentic.